Following is a dramatic storytelling script designed for a YouTube narrative. Imagine spending your entire life building a kingdom, brick by brick, only to be told you don't deserve the keys to the gate because of a biological label. I gave my youth, my back, and my sanity to a legacy I thought was mine. Then, in one afternoon, my own father turned my world to ash. Things isn't just a story about a business. It's a story about how I watched the people who betrayed me lose everything they ever cared about. Grab a seat, because this is how an empire falls when you mistake a workhorse for a mule. You name is what I am, but for this story, let's just call me the guy who did all the work. My grandfather, a man made of grit and iron, built a restaurant supply company from absolutely nothing in 1978. By the time I was a teenager, I was already learning how to operate heavy machinery in our warehouses. I understood the flow of inventory better than I understood my own hobbies. When Grandpa passed away in 2005, stepped in. But, he was never the operator. He was the guy who liked the prestige of the office, while I was the one fixing the broken walk-in freezers at 3 in the morning. Then there was my brother Cole. Cole was the golden child, the one who took 6 years to finish a 4-year degree while Dad paid for every reckless mistake he made. I, on the other hand, followed Spot College at my father's suggestion, because he told me the business would be mine. He told me, son, you don't need a degree when you have the empire. I believed him, and I worked 70-hour weeks to prove him right. While Cole was off playing golf and throwing around corporate buzzwords, he didn't understand I was digitizing our entire database. But I turned spreadsheets into a powerhouse system that saved us hundreds of thousands of dollars. Then I brought in major hotel chains and casino resorts, sealing deals that kept the company afloat during the toughest market cycles. But every time I asked for a raise, Dad would shake his head and tell me the company couldn't afford it. When I met my wife, Erin, things shifted from bad to unbearable. Erin was intelligent, sharp, and most importantly, she actually saw through my family's toxic facade. My mother despised her from the moment they met, constantly making snide remarks about her lineage and our lack of children. You see, a few years ago, I discovered I was medically unable to have kids. Instead of empathy, my family weaponized it. At a family dinner, Cole had the audacity to suggest that Erin needed a real man who could give her a family. I nearly put him through the table that night. My father, instead of defending me, told me to calm down and stop being so sensitive. That was the moment I realized I wasn't a son to them, just an employee. They didn't have to pay a fair wage to everything changed on a Monday morning. My father called me a rare occurrence and demanded I show up for a meeting on Tuesday. He said it was time to discuss the succession plan and make the future official. I spent that night thinking about all the years I'd given to those warehouses. I walked into that office with my head held high, thinking the time had finally come for them to acknowledge my sweat and my loyalty. I sat down and my father didn't even look me in the. He looked at Cole, then at the legal documents on the desk. He told me, since you aren't capable of producing an heir, the legacy stops with you. He handed a pen to my brother and signed over every single share, every warehouse, and every client contract to Cole. I felt my heart stop for a second. But then a strange cold clarity washed over me. I looked at my brother, who was smirking like he'd actually earned something, and then I looked at my father. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just stood up, thanked them for the lesson, and walked out the door for the last time. They thought they had won, but they didn't understand the business. They understood the titles, but I understood the people. I understood the manufacturers who only dealt with me, the logistics crews who only answered my calls. And the major clients who trusted my handshake, not a corporate contract. For the next 6 months, I watched from afar as the company began to crumble under Cole's incompetence. He tried to raise prices, and the clients left. He tried to cut costs on shipping, and the suppliers cut him off. The casino resorted brought in. They pulled their contract within 30 days because they couldn't get a straight answer from anyone in the front office. When the bank started calling and the inventory began to rot in the warehouses, my father called me.
Panicked?
He asked me to come back and fix the mess. I sat in my home office, with my wife by my side, and looked at the phone ringing. I let it go to voicemail. I told him in a brief,
Beanzel.
cold email that I had started my own consultancy, and that I was currently working with his former clients. By the time they realized what happened, the company was bankrupt. My father and Cole lost the house, the warehouses.
Pride they clung to so tightly.
The irony is that I didn't need the family name to succeed. I needed the freedom to build something that was actually mine. I didn't need an heir to prove my worth.
Fuses.
Because as I had built something that could stand on its own merits. My father spent his life obsessed with a legacy that he handed to a fool, and in the end, he was left with nothing but the silence of a cold house.
You don't talk to them anymore.
I don't need to. The truth is, sometimes the greatest revenge isn't getting even.
Vint.
It's watching the people who broke your heart realize that they were the ones who actually held the shovel to their own graves. And honestly, I've never been happier. The air in the office felt thin.
The oxygen had been vacuumed out of the room.
My father sat behind his mahogany desk, his expression unreadable, a stark contrast to the urgency in his voice earlier. I need you to come in Tuesday afternoon for a meeting.
Fine.
He had said, his tone thick with a fake sense of gravity. It's an important discussion about the future of the company, about succession planning, he continued. It's finally time we made things official, he added.
For a moment.
I actually felt the tension of 16 years of grinding labor start to dissolve in my chest.
But
16 years of 60-hour weeks, of missing every holiday.
Sacrificing my own youth to turn this failing local supply shop into a regional powerhouse.
I had earned this seat at the table. Yeah, absolutely, Dad, I replied, feeling a rare surge of excitement.
Fix.
What time works for you? I asked. 2:00 in the main conference room, he said. I'm sending a formal agenda so everyone is prepared. He finished. Everyone. That meant my brother, Cole, would be there too.
Fends it.
Which made sense given that he would need to be briefed on his transition into a secondary management role. I spent the entire weekend imagining how I would handle Ithau. I would be generous with Cole,
Making sure he felt valued.
even while I took the reins of the business. That night, I shared the news with Erin, my wife. She hugged me, her eyes bright with pride,
Whispering.
that she knew I had finally done it, and that my grandfather, who had founded this company, would have been looking down with a smile. I had been waiting for this moment since I was 18,
One.
the day my father convinced me to skip college, promising that the business would be my legacy, my reward for my loyalty. Tuesday arrived, and I walked into the conference room with my head held high,
Finch.
ready to accept the mantle of leadership. My father didn't waste time with pleasantries. I've decided to transfer 85% of the ownership to Cole, he announced, his voice flat.
15.
The remaining 15% will be split between your mother and me as a retirement cushion, he added, not even looking my way. I sat there, the blood draining from my face as he explained his reasoning.
Finch. Cole has a business degree and a fresh, modern perspective, he claimed.
Ignoring the fact that Cole had spent the last 5 years drifting through failed startups. Besides, Cole has a family he needs to provide for his daughter,
He said, the implication landing like a physical blow.
he needs to build something for the next generation, he added. The room went cold. I sat there stunned, while Cole sat across from me, wearing a fake, humble mask,
Find.
talking about job security and how he looked forward to my help in keeping things running. Well, be a great team, Cole said, his voice dripping with condescension. You handle the operations, the day-to-day grind,
Trembled.
and Il handles the vision and strategy, he suggested, as if he were doing me a favor by letting me stay in the building I had single-handedly built. I turned to my father, my voice shaking with restrained fury.
Bend.
I brought in the casino contract that saved us during the recession. I said my words sharp. I built the proprietary inventory system that saved us $500,000 last year, I reminded him.
Thing.
What exactly has Cole contributed, other than showing up once a month to collect a paycheck? I asked. My father's face turned a violent shade of red. You're being emotional, he barked, dismissively waving his hand.
Cole,
Has the education we need, and you can stay on as operations manager with a solid salary. He offered as if he were buying off a disgruntled employee. I stood up, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. Emotional?
Finged.
I repeated, a bitter laugh escaping my throat. I have spent 16 years of my life rebuilding this place while you were golfing in Arizona, I said, my voice rising.
Fake.
And now you are handing it to a guy who took 6 years to finish college because he couldn't pass basic accounting? I challenged. The silence that followed was suffocating. Cole's face went ash white.
And my mother refused to look up from her hands.
My father stood up, moving with a surprising predatory grace.
What did you just say?
He hissed. You heard me, I said, looking him dead in the eye. Cole is a failure,
I stated.
the words final and cutting. The only reason he has that degree is because you paid for him to retake the same classes. 3 times while I was here, working for free, I added. Without warning,
Father swung his hand.
the slap hit me with enough force that I stumbled, the room spinning, and the metallic taste of blood filling my mouth. You ungrateful piece of trash, he growled, his voice trembling with rage.
After everything I did for you, giving you a job when you had nothing,
He shouted, his eyes wide with madness. I stood straight, slowly wiping the blood from my lip, feeling the burning heat on my cheek.
I would get this business,
I said, my voice eerily calm. Now. That was the deal, I reminded him. My eyes locked on his, and now because Cole managed to start a family. The deal is off, I asked. My mother tried to intervene, whispering for everyone to calm down, but my father was beyond reason. He stepped into my personal space, his breath reeking of stale coffee. You want the truth? He spat. You were a mistake,
Being Zen's.
he said, the words hitting me harder than the slap. Your mother got pregnant when we were too young to know better, and we did our duty, he continued, his voice devoid of any warmth.
Fiend.
Cole was planned. Cole was wanted. Cole has a real future, he said, looking at me like I was a stain on his legacy. You can't even manage basic biology, he finished, a final cruel jab. In that moment,
Fan I had spent my life trying to impress ceased to exist for me.
the room was deathly quiet. Cole stared at the floor, his face a portrait of cowardice, while my mother looked on, frozen in fear. My father stood there,
Fanned.
his hand still raised, waiting for me to break. I touched the wound on my cheek, my fingers coming away red, and felt a strange, chilling sense of clarity. You know what the funny thing is? I asked, my voice barely a whisper.
Functions.
I actually believed you, I said, looking at him with nothing but pity. I believed you when you said I was building something that mattered. I said, picking up my jacket. Cole,
Vex.
you are going to run this company into the ground within 6 months, I said, turning my gaze to my brother. Dad, you just lost the only person who knew how to keep the lights on, I said, walking toward the door. Mom,
Evil.
enjoy your retirement fund while it lasts, because by Christmas, this place will be bankrupt, I warned. I walked out of that office and into the parking lot, the sunlight feeling brighter than it had in years.
Wasn't angry anymore.
I was methodical. I had spent 16 years building systems. They couldn't possibly understand my custom inventory tracking software, the proprietary pricing algorithms,
Fanged.
the deep-rooted relationships with the top-tier suppliers. All of it existed in my head and on the drives I personally owned. They wanted to see what the business looked like without me.
Being tout.
I was about to give them a front-row seat to the collapse. I climbed into my truck, started the engine, and didn't look back once. The reign of the amateur had begun, and I couldn't wait to watch it burn.
Exit.
The air in the office was suffocating, thick with the smell of stale coffee and the weight of 16 years wasted on people who treated my loyalty like a liability. I stood in the center of the room,
Me backpack heavy.
with the only things that actually mattered: my drive, my vision, and my future. I didn't just walk away, I dismantled their kingdom from the inside out before the door even clicked shut behind me.
You get.
Every algorithm that had saved them millions, every custom database, every client contact, all of it was mine, created on my own time and my own equipment. I wiped the servers clean of my digital footprint, revoked my credentials, fixed, and deleted the access codes that kept their precious business running. I hauled my grandfather's old toolbox, the one that had been my constant companion since I turned 18 in, to the bed of my truck. Phew. I was leaving behind the ruins of a family that had decided I was nothing more than a convenient ladder for them to climb. From the parking lot, I dialed Aaron, my hands steady for the first time in months. Bing. They handed the keys to the empire to Cole, effectively erasing every ounce of sweat id poured into that foundation. I heard the sharp intake of breath on the other end, followed by 5 seconds of heavy, meaningful silence. Newton. Good, Aaron finally said, her voice like iron. Load every single thing you own, and come home. They never deserved 1 second of your life anyway. Fiends a piss. The drive home felt like a transformation. The 16 years of proprietary knowledge in the back of my truck was no longer a burden, but a weapon. My phone began to light up with frantic messages, almost as soon as I pulled out of the lot. Dad sent long, rambling texts about family obligations and how I was being a petulant child. Thanks. Clearly terrified that his golden goose had just flown the coop. Cole sent desperate pings about valuing my expertise, his tone shifting from arrogance to sheer panic once he realized the systems were offline. Thanks. Mom left voicemails crying about me breaking my father's heart, but the sound of her voice did nothing but harden my resolve. I blocked them all, one by one, bang, until the only sound in the truck was the hum of the engine and the promise of what was to come. Erin was waiting on the porch, and the moment she saw the bruise on my face, she didn't ask a single question. She just pulled me into a grip that felt like solid ground, holding on until the trembling in my own hands finally stopped. "What do you need?" she whispered, her eyes searching mine with a ferocity that made me feel invincible. "You need a lawyer," I replied. "The best one we can find." By Tuesday, I was sitting in a high-rise office, spreading 16 years of meticulously kept documentation across the mahogany table. Bang. My attorney was a man who looked like he hadn't smiled since the 90s, and he spent 3 hours dissecting every scrap of evidence id brought. I showed him the timestamps on the source code, seats for the hardware id bought, and the metadata proving I had worked these miracles on my own time. "This is all yours," he said, tapping a pen against the stack of files. "You have no employment contract. You used your own resources, and you worked off hours. They can't touch a single line." Then, I pulled out the trump card, the paper trail of broken promises. Emails from 2010, where Dad explicitly laid out the plan for me to take over the company. Stot and text messages from 2014, confirming the succession plan. I even had a handwritten card from 2016, thanking me for my unstoppable dedication to the business you will inherit. The attorney leaned back, a genuine, predatory grin spreading across his face. "Promissory estoppel," he muttered, scribbling furiously. "Business based on their promises, and they've been leveraging your life's work for pennies on the dollar." We went through the wage theft 70-hour weeks, for a decade with no overtime. Think. All documented through my personal calendars. We calculated the damages, hitting nearly $1 million in ownership value, and hundreds of thousands more in unjust enrichment. He saw the performance reviews, where they praised me to the skies while simultaneously noting that they should keep compensation static to maximize their own pockets. He looked at me differently then, realizing I hadn't just been a victim, had been a scholar of their corruption. "I trusted them," I admitted, "but am not a fool." The demand letter went out that following Monday, 12-page legal death warrant, detailing every betrayal and every dollar they owed me. We laid out the massive contracts. I'd secured the casino deal, the hotel chain, Fuse Tracy, the university system, and itemized exactly how much they stood to lose without my management. The letter closed with a 10-day deadline for a serious settlement, or they would face a courtroom nightmare that would strip them bare. To add salt to the wound, we included a polite cold offer. I would be happy to license my proprietary systems back to them, at full market rate. I was no longer the son they could exploit. I was the business partner they were now forced to beg. 3 days later, My phone rang, and the caller eyed showed the one name I had been waiting to see. Dad was calling.
Didn't sound like a leader anymore.
He sounded like a man standing in the wreckage of a house he'd burned down himself. We need to talk, he stammered, his voice thin and cracking. I'm listening, I said,
Thingy.
leaning back and watching the sunset. Knowing that for the first time in 16 years, I was finally in control. The phone felt heavy in my hand, but for the first time in 16 years, it felt like a weapon instead of a leash.
Things, you know that.
I had spent those years building the backbone of our family business, Riverside Hotels, while Dad looked on with indifference. He had promised me ownership, repeatedly in writing, only to hand the keys to Cole.
Feel his golden child.
The moment the ink on the latest contract dried, but he made a fatal error. He thought I was just an employee. He didn't realize I was the architect of the entire operation.
You.
When the lawyer's letter landed on his desk, the silence that followed was the first crack in his empire. 3 days later, my phone buzzed. It was Dad. I let it ring until the very last second.
To watch the time tick away.
When I finally picked up, I didn't say a word. What in the hell do you think you're doing? His voice cracked, raw with a mix of fury and the unmistakable tremor of panic. I didn't flinch.
You.
Protecting my intellectual property, Dad, I replied, my voice steady and cold. I'm collecting on 16 years of wage theft. Wage theft? He sputtered, his tones dripping with indignation. I gave you a career.
You a life. Is this how you repay the man who raised you?
I leaned back, staring out at the Arizona sunset. You promised me ownership, Dad, multiple times, in writing. Then you handed it all to Cole.
It's called promissory estoppel.
My attorney laid it out clearly in the letter. You might want to have your guy read it again if he can actually comprehend it. You're trying to destroy us, he yelled, his voice rising to a frantic pitch. You're trying to tear down everything your grandfather spent his life building. I let out a dry, humorless laugh. No, Grandpa started it. You coasted on his momentum.
Credit.
I am the one who built it into something of value. And then you handed it to a man who couldn't run a lemonade stand. He tried to pivot, his voice turning oily. Our attorney says you don't have a case.
Thing yo
Everything you created belongs to the company. Dad, your attorney is the guy you play golf with on Thursdays who handles local permits. He's never litigated an IP case in his life. My attorney? He's a specialist.
He's salivating at the thought of this discovery phase.
This is nothing but extortion, he roared. No, I countered, the calmness in my voice acting like a mirror for his chaos.
Fusion.
Extortion is working someone 70 hours a week for 16 years while dangling ownership in front of them, only to give it to your favorite son. This is simply me collecting what I am owed. Silence. Heavy.
Suffocating silence.
The systems, he finally whispered, they were built for company purposes, using company data. On my personal laptop. I corrected him, on my own time, with software I paid for out of my own pocket. Check the metadata on those files, Dad. Every single one shows they were created outside business hours on equipment registered to me. Your attorney will explain why that matters. I hung up on him, mid-sentence,
Void.
and blocked his number before the dial tone could even fade. My phone pinged immediately. It was my attorney. Perfect, the text read, keep recording everything. They are panicking. The next day,
Cole called from a burner number.
I picked up, curious to see what script he had been fed. Hey, man, Cole said, his voice forced, trying to sound like a brotherly buddy and landing somewhere between desperate and pathetic.
Can we talk about this lawsuit thing?
I think there's been a massive misunderstanding. I stayed silent, letting the air in the room grow thick. Look, I know. You're upset about the ownership decision, he continued,
Fanted.
his confidence leaking out with every word. But this legal stuff is insane. We're family. We can work this out. Still, I said nothing. Dad told me you think we're using your systems without permission, he ventured.
Pay you a consulting fee or something.
We don't need to involve lawyers. I couldn't help it. I let out a short, sharp laugh. A consulting fee. Yeah, he sounded relieved, thinking I was biting. Like,
You could set up
a monthly payment. Keep you in the loop. You'd still be part of the business. I smiled. Though he couldn't see it. Tot Cole, your entire operation inventory tracking, the client database, the pricing models,
Fame.
the supplier relationships, those are all mine. Without those, you have warehouses full of expensive equipment you can't track and clients you don't know how to serve. What is that worth to you? He tried to puff out his chest.
We can rebuild those.
He stammered. Might take a little time.
But,
Riverside Hotels called my personal cell yesterday, I interrupted.
Faye,
They wanted to know if I was still with the company because they're up for a massive contract renewal. I told them. No. That's a $700 account, Cole.
Execs.
How many of those can you afford to lose while you're rebuilding? The line went dead quiet. The casino group. I pushed, twisting the knife. They only stayed because of my relationship with their VP of operations.
Man for 8 years.
You've met him twice, and the university system. I spent 3 years negotiating that contract. You just showed up for the photo op for Facebook. Cole,
The names and the phone numbers.
I have the relationships. There is a massive difference. His voice turned jagged. You're trying to sabotage us. No, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper.
Protecting what's mine.
You're just finally realizing how much you needed me. You should have thought about that before Dad gave you everything. Cole dropped the nice guy act instantly. You're just jealous, he hissed.
You can't handle the fact that I was chosen for this, and you weren't.
You were chosen because you have a kid. Cole, that is the only reason. Not because you earned it. Not because you built a single stone of this company.
Just because you managed to reproduce and I didn't.
Congratulations on your one and only accomplishment. At least I have a life, he snapped. A family, real responsibilities. You're just bitter because I cut him off.
Fusey.
How's the inventory system working out, Cole? Can you track your stock levels yet? Because I'm getting texts from suppliers asking about missed orders. Apparently, nobody knows what you actually have in those warehouses.
We're handling it.
He lied through his teeth. You're guessing. You've been physically walking 3 warehouses for days because the tracking system is locked out. How many man-hours are you burning on that? 20.
30 per day.
He didn't answer. The client database is encrypted. Cole, you can't access the notes on account preferences, the buying cycles, or the decision makers. You're flying blind on every single sales call.
Pricing algorithms are gone.
So you're either overbidding and losing contracts or underbidding and losing money. Should I keep going? I waited for the crack to break, listening to the frantic breathing on the other end.
Big one.
This wasn't just a lawsuit. This was the reckoning, and I was finally the one in control. This is a drama-focused storytelling script designed for a YouTube channel.
Finch.
The text is formatted with double spacing for optimal readability and teleprompter use. The phone felt heavy in my hand, vibrating with the frantic energy of a man who realized his empire was built on a foundation of stolen labor.
Beard.
Cole was hyperventilating on the other end, his voice cracking between arrogance and genuine panic. You're flying blind on every single sales call, Cole, I said, my voice steady, ice cold. The pricing algorithms are gone.
Fend.
Aren't they? You're either overbidding and losing contracts, or you're underbidding and hemorrhaging money. Should I keep going, or do you want to keep pretending you're the CEO of a sinking ship? Cole spat back.
Voice trembling with rage. You can't just steal company property.
That's software, those database stats, all proprietary assets. I let out a low, genuine laugh. It was the first time I'd felt truly light in 16 years.
It's not company property. Cole.
Check the file metadata yourself if you're so smart. Created on my personal laptop, stored on my personal cloud, coded entirely outside of working hours. It's mine.
Fernie will confirm that.
Assuming he's worth the retainer.
You're wasting on him.
The silence on the line was deafening. Cole was struggling to breathe now. He'll make sure you never work in this industry again. He threatened, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. I have 3 major clients who called me just this week, desperate to know if I'm launching my own operation.
Kingdom.
I told them I'd think about it. How many more of those conversations do you want me to have, Cole? You wouldn't dare, he hissed. I already backed up my entire contact list. Every client, every supplier,
Every manufacturer's rep I've cultivated for 16 years.
they know my name. They know my work ethic. Most of them don't even know yours, Cole. So yeah, I absolutely would. This is extortion. No, this is business.
Just on the receiving end for once. Doesn't feel great, does it?
He tried one last desperate maneuver, his tone shifting into a pathetic wheezing negotiation. Look, we can talk. We can figure this out.
Do you actually want?
Read the settlement demand I sent over. It's all laid out in black and white. Or you can ignore it, and we'll see you in the courtroom. Either way,
2 weeks.
before your first major fulfillment failure. I'm guessing 4 weeks before you lose your biggest account, and 3 months before you're filing for bankruptcy. But hey,
You've got that expensive business degree Dad paid for.
right? I hung up. I blocked his number. My partner, Aaron, walked into the living room an hour later, a cautious look on his face. How'd the call go?
He asked.
Exactly as expected, I replied, leaning back into the sofa. He tried friendly, then threatening, then desperate. I told him to read the demand and hung up. Do you think they'll actually settle?
They don't have a choice.
Without my systems, they're bleeding cash, and they don't even know where the tourniquet is yet. The cracks didn't take long to surface. By the following Thursday, the first domino fell.
Regional restaurant chain.
A regional restaurant chain worth $180,000 annually called my personal cell. The VP of purchasing sounded utterly frazzled. I've been trying to confirm an order for 3 days, she said.
You dad.
Nobody can tell me if you guys actually have the equipment in stock. Are you still with the company? I kept it professional, keeping my distance. No, I left recently. They're handling things now. Well,
Vent.
handling them. Very well, she sighed. We need 6 commercial ovens by the end of the month, and I can't get a straight answer on availability. I'd recommend calling Cole directly, I suggested calmly.
He's running things now.
She groaned. I tried. He said he'd check the inventory and call me back, but that was 2 days ago. Of course it was.
Spring.
Cole couldn't access the inventory system because he didn't know how to navigate the architecture it built. They were likely wandering the warehouses right now, counting ovens by hand like it was the 19th century. Sorry,
Dang it. I can't help, I said.
I'm not with the company anymore. If you ever end up starting your own operation, she said, her voice lowering, you should let me know. I smiled, looking at my reflection in the dark screen of my laptop.
You know,
I'll keep that in mind. The third client didn't even bother calling the office. The VP of a massive casino group reached out to me directly. Heard you went independent, he said.
Yunqing.
We're looking at major equipment upgrades for 3 of our properties. Interested in bidding. I'm considering my options, I told him. Give me a few weeks to see where things land. Take your time, he replied.
Thing.
We'd honestly rather wait for you than deal with the circus currently running your old shop. 2 weeks in, their attorney sent a weak, frantic response to my demand letter.
Feed drain.
They claimed the company had rights to all work product created during my tenure and requested a friendly meeting. My attorney read the email and let out a dry, satisfied chuckle. They were screwed, and they know it.
Unite. That's not a legal argument. That's a surrender flag.
He fired back a counter letter that dismantled their entire position. Dot. He highlighted the lack of a non-compete or IP ownership clause in my original contract.
Vex.
To the timestamps, proving every file was generated on my hardware.
On my time.
And finally, he added a friendly reminder that if they wanted to fight this in court, the discovery phase would expose 16 years of wage law violations. Every hour of overtime they skipped paying, every dime they shaved off my compensation, it would all become public record the second we filed.
They went silent for 8 days.
Meanwhile, the business was actively cannibalizing itself. That hotel account I'd heard rumors about, they walked. $90,000 in annual contracts vaporized.
Thanked.
All because Cole drove out there and managed to insult the manager during an attempt at damage control. The casino group reached out again, skipping the corporate line entirely.
Ian.
They just wanted to know if I was available for private consulting. I told them I was finalizing my independent operation. They told me to call the second I was ready. 3 warehouse employees quit when their paychecks were delayed by a week due to cash flow issues. The reality was, those operational failures were costing them money they didn't have.
Feud.
Word in the industry grapevine was that Dad was working 80-hour weeks trying to hold the walls up. Cole was reportedly living at the warehouse, looking like a ghost.
Vent.
Mom was supposedly crying every time someone mentioned my name. And the most surprising part, I couldn't bring myself to feel a single ounce of pity. My settlement demand remained on the table. 420,000,
Full IP ownership in writing.
a total release from any non-compete, and a written acknowledgement of my contributions. They had 30 days. On day 29, their attorney called mine, begging for mediation,
He told my lawyer.
to make them wait 3 more days. Let them sweat. Let them feel the pressure of the deadline they had forced on me for years. On day 32, we agreed to mediation.
For I spent that time launching my own ship.
I filed the LLC paperwork under a new name. I secured a prime warehouse lease in the next county. I reached out to 2 of the employees who had quit the family business.
Accepted my offer.
I began lining up credit with manufacturers, and thanks to my reputation, 3 major suppliers gave me terms even better than what my father had received.
Phantom.
One supplier rep was brutally honest. We only worked with them because of you, he said, and I'm actually happy to be working with you directly now. I finally got my systems running on my new secure servers.
Everything was in place.
The game had changed, and for the first time, I wasn't just playing. I was the one making the rules. The tension in the conference room was thick enough to cut with a blade. My attorney,
Fington.
a shark in a tailored suit, sat back and watched the chaos unfold. Cole and Dad looked like shadows of their former selves. Dad had withered away, losing weight. I didn't think he could spare,
Fingsham.
while Cole's hairline was retreating under the stress of a business he couldn't actually manage. Mom was there too, her eyes puffy, a silent plea for mercy that I had stopped answering years ago.
Fists.
Their lawyer opened with a pathetic offer. $100,000 in exchange for a lifetime non-compete clause. He clearly didn't realize who he was dealing with.
Use.
My attorney didn't even blink. He just started packing his briefcase as if the meeting were already over. Panic flickered across the room. Wait, let's talk. Their attorney stammered, his facade of confidence crumbling.
Naked.
I leaned forward, my voice calm, cold, and steady. Let's lay it out on the table, I said. My attorney itemized the damage, $950,000 for the ownership value my grandfather had intended for me.
Fees.
$340,000 in unpaid wages, and the massive mounting debt for the intellectual property they had been stealing for years. Disgorgement of profits, my lawyer added, his voice sharp.
Every cent you made.
Using my systems while I was being pushed out. Dad let out a jagged, bitter laugh that sounded like glass breaking. You really want to bleed us dry just to build your own empire? He hissed.
Fuseman.
I met his gaze without flinching.
You destroyed the legacy.
Grandpa left behind, the moment you handed the keys to someone who couldn't balance a checkbook, I replied. I'm just reclaiming my investment. Cole looked at me.
Face a mask of desperate anger.
We're going bankrupt because of this, he pleaded. I didn't offer him a shred of sympathy.
Considered the cost. Before you spent
16 years treating me like a ghost in my own family's company. After 3 hours of agonizing back and forth, we reached an agreement.
Fusion.
$285,000, full legal ownership of the software I created, and a formal written acknowledgement. Of my contributions to the firm's growth. It was more than just money, it was the truth.
Finally set in stone.
As the final signature hit the paper, I stood up, ready to leave the nightmare behind. Dad's voice cracked from the corner of the room. I hope you're satisfied.
Successfully dismantled everything your grandfather built.
I stopped at the door, turning back one last time. Grandpa built a masterpiece, he said, my voice quiet but firm.
Then, you're the one who tore it down for a substitute.
Zim, just starting over. And this time, Zim doing it the right way. I walked out into the crisp air, and for the first time in 16 years, I felt the weight lift off my chest.
3 months later,
My life was humming along perfectly when my phone buzzed with an unknown caller. I let it go to voicemail. It was Cole. Hey man, I know things were rough, but I need to talk to you.
voice sounded hollow. It's important. Call me back.
I deleted it. The calls continued, getting more desperate every day, until I finally picked up on the fourth attempt.
What?
I barked. Look, the company is failing,
They're cutting jobs.
and I'm on the list, Cole confessed, his pride replaced by raw fear. I've got kids, a mortgage. You're doing so well, could you bring me on? I know the business inside and out. I listened,
Feared.
a cold smile touching my lips. You mean the business you once called a hobby that I would inevitably destroy? I asked. Come on, that was a long time ago, he pleaded. Your time is up, I said and hung up. He tried to text me, spinning some narrative about blood being thicker than water, but I was done playing the martyr for his failures. 2 weeks later, Dad showed up at my warehouse unannounced. My receptionist buzzed me,
Phil's.
her voice hesitant. There's a gentleman here to see you. He says he's your father. Tell him I'm busy, I replied. 5 minutes later, she buzzed again. He says, hell, wait, as long as it takes.
From.
I let him sit in the lobby for 2 hours while I went about my day, handling meetings and managing my success. When I finally walked out, he looked smaller, older, and entirely broken. What do you want, Dad? I asked.
Can we talk privately?
Say it now, I commanded. He looked at the receptionist, his jaw twitching, but he realized I wouldn't budge. I made mistakes, he muttered. Cole needs a chance.
You don't have to hire him. Maybe you could find a role for him. He's your brother.
I stared at him, feeling absolutely nothing. You're still my father, I said, my voice devoid of warmth.
They didn't stop you from burning down my future.
To prop up his vanity. Did it? I thought I was doing what was best for the family, he defended. No, I countered, stepping closer.
Vinced.
You only ever cared about what was best for him. I was just the engine that kept the car running, and you didn't care how much I suffered as long as his seat was comfortable. He went red with anger,
You.
his eyes searching mine for a flicker of the son I used to be. I came here to make peace, he growled. So what? I asked, standing tall. You're just going to sit there and watch him suffer.
Fact.
The same way you watched me struggle for 16 years while you handed him the world on a silver platter. I turned my back on him. You're not here for peace, Dad. You're here because the bill finally came due.
You don't like the price.
I left him standing in the lobby. I had built my own foundation, and for the first time in my life, I didn't need anyone's permission to stand on it. Still what? Still holding you accountable?
EM.
The words felt like ice, cutting through the stifling heat of the office. My brother Cole stood there with that familiar entitled smirk, the one that had shielded him from consequences his entire life.
It.
He sneered, his voice dripping with false disbelief. You're just going to sit there and watch your own brother struggle.
Fame Reddit.
The same way you watched me grind for 16 years while you handed him the keys to the kingdom.
I didn't blink.
I just watched the man who had been my shadow for a decade,
Protion.
the man who had stolen every credit ever earned, finally start to unravel.
Yeah, Cole.
I said, my voice eerily calm. Exactly like that. You've changed, he spat, his face flushing a deep, ugly red.
You used to have a heart.
I leaned back, feeling the weight of the truth in my chest. I still do, I replied, staring him dead in the eyes.
Fict.
Just not for people who only value me when they need a scapegoat for their own incompetence. I stood up, signaling to the guard at the door. Cole didn't even have time to sputter a protest before security was at his elbows.
Finged.
He didn't look back as they dragged him out, and for the first time in years, the air in the room felt breathable. 10 minutes later, he was off the premises. 3 weeks after that, he was unemployed.
4 months to find a job.
And when he finally did, the paycheck was a fraction of what he used to waste on his gambling habits. As for Dad, he was 63,
Brings.
still grinding away at the same warehouse he used to manage, stuck doing the kind of grunt work he used to force on the juniors and me. I was finally building something that was mine, something they would never.
Fumes ever be able to touch.
Turns out, I sleep perfectly fine at night. The first settlement payment hit my account exactly 1 week later. $50,000 cash. The rest was set in monthly installments that felt like sweet, hard-won justice. I launched my own firm that same week, and I didn't make the same mistakes they did. I kept it lean. One warehouse, not five sprawling,
Fingant.
leaking money pits. I targeted high margin, custom equipment, moving away from the bloated, generic inventory that had crippled our family business for years.
Ficken.
I implemented automated management systems that I had spent years perfecting in the dark. I hired a small, elite team instead of a workforce of people who didn't care.
Few former.
Former employees I brought on board were worth 10 of Dad's lazy warehouse crew. They knew the industry, they knew the clients, and they worked with a level of precision that made my old company look like a joke.
Suppliers were actually eager to work with me.
My reputation in the trade was solid as a rock. Some manufacturers even gave me better terms than Dad's company had ever seen in its entire history. Then the big fish bit.
Ichi.
I landed the regional hotel chain contracted deal worth $650,000 annually. They hadn't looked for a general bid, they had specifically sought me out.
Beacon.
Having heard through the grapevine that I had finally gone independent. The local casino group followed right after. The state university system came next. 3 massive accounts, all secured in the blink of an eye.
Fangy.
Meanwhile, the family legacy was falling apart. Dad's company limped along for 8 more months, bleeding cash until they had no choice but to liquidate.
Thing.
A regional competitor swept in and bought the remains for $550,000. That's pennies compared to what it was worth when I was running the daily operations.
Fingid.
Dad and Cole both had to swallow their pride and take entry-level roles with the company that bought us out. Dad was demoted to a regional sales manager, pulling in maybe $65,000 a year. Cole.
He was back in warehouse operations, hauling boxes for 45 grand.
They were employees now, working under the thumb of the very people they used to look down on. The irony was beautiful, sharp, and cold.
Fiction.
Mom and Dad had to sell their family home to cover the lingering debts of the business collapse. They downsized to a cramped, lonely condo. The retirement fund they had invested into the failing business.
Gone. Vanished when they sold for next to nothing.
My company hit $2.8 million in annual revenue by month 10. I run a tight ship, fair wages, great benefits, and clear, non-negotiable expectations. If you work hard,
Rewarded.
nobody gets handouts. Nobody gets carried. Everything Grandpa would have wanted, and everything they tried to destroy. Cole sent me a Christmas card last year. It was a generic, mass-produced thing with a cheesy photo of his family taped inside. There was a handwritten note about how enough time had passed and how we should reconnect. I didn't even finish reading it.
Finked.
I dropped it straight into the trash can without a second thought. They lost their legacy. I built mine from the ashes. And honestly, I don't lose a single minute of sleep over it. Guys, we are so incredibly close to hitting that 100,000 subscriber mark on this channel. If you aren't subscribed yet, please consider hitting that button.
Fusion defeats.
It really helps us reach more people and keep these stories coming. Thanks for helping make this dream a reality.